A woman in Summerlin calling police this week after a man claiming to be from NV Energy, a rep with them, was caught on camera.
He was seemingly casing her home for what she thinks could have been an attempted break-in. Fox 5's Shauna Kalafi is here now with the details.
Yeah, guys, or she thinks it may have been a scam like the ones that NV Energy has warnings about on their website. They say that there have been people who have been knocking on doors, even threatening to disconnect service. So they're warning people to confirm that it's a rep before you open the door.
I'm with NV Energy, the power company.
A woman in Summerlin suspicious of a stranger at her home Monday afternoon after her cameras detected the man checking windows around her house and looking over the wall into her backyard. What worried her even more was the first question the man asked when he came to the door.
Oh, hi. Hi, are you home?
Claimed to be with NV Energy, and he showed a badge that the homeowner believes was fake.
I'm actually one of the specialists in the neighborhood. I'm helping out your neighbors, John and Susan Martin, just down the road.
The homeowner told the man she's not interested in solar panels, but the man never specified why exactly he was at her door.
I can come back another time. I just want to introduce myself. I didn't know if you were home. I was looking at your roof. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm not selling anything. No, I'm not selling anything. Yeah, I'm just helping out. I'm just letting people know what's going on in the neighborhood is all.
NV Energy's website warns customers that individuals posing as NV Energy representatives have been visiting customers demanding payment and threatening disconnection.
And that homeowner also posted screenshots from that doorbell video you saw online. She got several responses from people all across the valley claiming that the same man has also knocked on their door, although police have not confirmed that it is the same person. John and Kim.
Thank you, Shauna. And NV Energy says if you think someone is misrepresenting themselves, you can always call their corporate security to verify employment. We have that phone number under this story on our website. That is fox5vegas.com.